How the Chinese Empire survived for 2,000 years. Rome collapsed under its own weight. Its roads still stretch across continents. Its ruins still stand in silence, but its power vanished. The Persian empires rose in brilliance and disappeared into fragments. Even the Mongols, who once ruled the largest land empire in history, faded faster than they arrived. History is filled with giants that fell and never stood again. Now consider this. For more than 2,000 years, one civilization refused to follow that pattern. It fractured, burned, collapsed into chaos, and yet every time it returned. Not as something new, but as something strangely familiar. China did not simply survive history. It kept rewriting it. Picture this moment. A capital city in flames, the emperor fleeing or already dead, armies turning against their own banners, famine spreading through villages. By every rule of history, this is the end. This is where empires die. And yet, in China, this is where something else begins. A new dynasty rises. A new ruler claims legitimacy. The same language, the same traditions, the same structure reassemble themselves as if the collapse was only a pause. The names change, the faces change, the system remains. This is the mystery. Not how China became powerful, but how it refused to disappear. How do you destroy something that keeps rebuilding itself from its own ruins? What kind of civilization turns collapse into continuity? You are about to step into a story that does not follow the usual rules of history. A story where destruction is not failure, but a mechanism. Where chaos is not the enemy, but part of the design. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Because the Chinese Empire did not survive in spite of collapse. It survived because of it. The paradox, an empire that expected to fall. Most empires are built on a fragile illusion. They believe they are meant to last. Their rulers speak as if their authority is absolute, as if time itself will protect what they have created. That belief becomes their blind spot. Because when the first cracks appear, when famine spreads, when corruption weakens the core, they react too late. They try to preserve what is already collapsing, and history shows the result. They fall, and they do not return. China followed a different logic. At the heart of its system was a quiet, unsettling idea. Power was never permanent. No emperor ruled by default. No dynasty was guaranteed survival. Authority had to be earned and constantly proven. And the moment that balance was lost, everything could change. This was not a theory discussed in isolation. It was a principle that shaped how people understood reality itself. Floods, droughts, rebellions, economic collapse, all of these were not seen as random misfortunes. They were interpreted as signs, signals that something deeper had shifted, signals that the order of the world was no longer aligned. This idea became known as the mandate of heaven. But do not imagine it as a distant spiritual concept. It functioned like a political engine. It gave meaning to instability. It gave structure to chaos. When a ruler governed well, maintaining harmony and stability, it was said that heaven supported him. When suffering spread, when injustice became visible, when disorder took hold, that support was believed to be withdrawn. Now pause and consider the consequence. If heaven could withdraw its mandate, then rebellion was no longer just treason. It could become justified. It could become necessary. A failed ruler was not simply overthrown. He was replaced because he had already lost the right to rule. This changes how an empire behaves. In most civilizations, rebellion is a threat that must be crushed at all costs. In China, rebellion could transform into a transfer of legitimacy. The same force that destroyed one dynasty could give birth to another. The system did not deny collapse. It absorbed it. This created a strange kind of stability. Not the stability of permanence, but the stability of continuity. Dynasties came and went, but the structure remained. The language remained. The administrative logic remained. The idea of what China was did not disappear when a ruler fell. Imagine living inside a system like this. You witness war, famine, and chaos. You see the collapse of power around you. But instead of believing everything is ending, you understand something else is happening. The old order is losing its place. A new one is preparing to rise. The cycle is not breaking, it is turning. This is where China diverges from almost every other empire in history. It did not build itself on the promise of eternal rule. It built itself on the expectation of change. And because of that, it developed a way to survive what destroys others. Collapse was not a failure of the system. It was one of its functions. Yet this raises a deeper problem. If power is always at risk, if legitimacy can vanish, if rebellion can become justified, then fear alone cannot hold an empire together. Violence can create control, but it cannot sustain it forever. So the question becomes unavoidable. If fear is not enough, what is? That question would be answered by the first ruler who tried to impose absolute control over everything. A ruler who believed he could eliminate chaos entirely. A ruler who built one of the most powerful systems the world had ever seen, and watched it collapse almost immediately. The first experiment, Qin, power through fear. You are standing at the edge of a battlefield where the future of an entire civilization is being decided. Smoke drifts across the horizon. The last resistance is collapsing. One by one, rival states fall, their banners torn down, their rulers defeated. For the first time in centuries, the chaos of endless war is about to end. And at the center of it all stands one man, Qin Shi Huang. He does not want to rule a kingdom. He wants to control reality itself. When he unifies China in 221 BCE, he does something no one had ever done before. He does not just conquer territory, he reshapes the entire system. He standardizes writing, currency, weights, measurements. He forces millions to build roads, canals, and the first version of what will become the Great Wall. He breaks the power of the old aristocracies and replaces them with direct control from the center. Everything becomes one empire, one authority, one truth. It feels unstoppable. But there is something else beneath the surface, something colder. This entire system is built on fear. Laws are harsh and unforgiving. Punishments are brutal and immediate. Dissent is not tolerated. Books are burned. Scholars are silenced. Thought itself becomes dangerous. The message is clear: obey or be erased. For a moment, it works. Order replaces chaos. Stability replaces war. The empire moves with precision, like a machine. No rebellion can survive this level of control. No resistance can organize under constant surveillance. It looks like Qin Shi Huang has done the impossible. He has eliminated uncertainty. But listen closely. Beneath that silence, something is building. Not loyalty, not belief, something else. Pressure. Because fear can force obedience, but it cannot create trust. It can suppress resistance, but it cannot remove it. It pushes it underground. It waits. And then, the moment the center weakens, everything breaks. Qin Shi Huang dies. And almost immediately, the system he built begins to collapse. Officials turn against each other. Revolts ignite across the land. The same centralized control that once held everything together now becomes a weakness. When the top fractures, there is nothing else to hold the structure in place. Within a few years, the most powerful empire ever created is gone. Think about that. A system designed to control everything could not even survive the death of one man. This is the turning point, because now the lesson is clear. Absolute power can create unity, but it cannot sustain it. Fear can build an empire, but it cannot make it endure. Control without belief is temporary, and this failure becomes something far more valuable than success. It becomes a warning. The next generation will not ignore it. They will study it. They will understand that if China is to survive, it needs something deeper than force. Something that does not disappear when a ruler dies. Something that people choose to follow, even when no one is watching. That is where the real transformation begins. The breakthrough, Han, Power through ideas. The empire has just collapsed. Not slowly, not gracefully, but violently. The system that promised absolute control has shattered, and the land is once again consumed by war. Armies rise from nothing. Alliances form and dissolve overnight. The unity that was forced into existence disappears almost as quickly as it was created. Out of that chaos, a new figure emerges. Not a king by birth, not a noble shaped by tradition. A man who understands something the previous ruler did not. Liu Bang. He has seen the rise and fall of absolute power. He has seen what fear can build and how quickly it collapses. And instead of repeating the same mistake, he chooses a different path. At first, nothing seems different. He takes control. He establishes a new dynasty. Order begins to return. But beneath the surface, something fundamental is changing. This is no longer about forcing unity. This is about creating something that can survive beyond the ruler himself. The Han Dynasty does not reject control, it redefines it. Instead of relying only on harsh laws and punishment, it introduces something more subtle and far more powerful. A system of thought, a framework that teaches people not just how to obey, but why obedience matters. Not just how to follow orders, but how to see themselves as part of a greater structure. This is where Confucius enters the story, not as a ruler, but as an architect of ideas. His teachings are not about domination. They are about order, about hierarchy, responsibility, duty, about the relationship between ruler and subject, father and son, individual and state. Everything has its place. Everything has a role. Harmony is not enforced. It is cultivated. And this changes everything. Because now, loyalty is no longer driven by fear alone. It is reinforced by belief. The empire is no longer just a structure imposed from above. It becomes something internal, something people carry within themselves. The Han rulers understand this. They take these ideas and transform them into policy. They build an administrative system that values education, discipline, and moral conduct. Officials are no longer chosen only for their power, but for their knowledge. The state begins to run not just on authority, but on competence. Think about the difference. Under Qin, the empire functioned like a machine, efficient, powerful, but dependent on constant pressure. Under Han, it becomes something else, a living system, flexible, adaptive, capable of surviving shocks because it is supported from within. This is the breakthrough. China is no longer just an empire held together by force. It is becoming a civilization held together by ideas. And ideas do not collapse the way armies do. When a ruler fails, the system does not disappear. The structure remains. The values remain. The understanding of how society should function remains. Even in times of division, those foundations continue to shape what comes next. This is why, even after the Han Dynasty eventually declines, something remarkable happens. The empire fragments, but it does not dissolve. The identity remains intact. The blueprint is still there, waiting to be rebuilt. Now, the pattern is beginning to reveal itself. Power alone is temporary. Ideas endure, but there is still a challenge ahead. Because even the strongest ideas must face something that has destroyed countless civilizations throughout history. Invasion. And what happens next will defy every expectation. The invasion that failed, when conquerors became Chinese. You would expect this to be the moment everything ends. An empire weakened from within, borders exposed, armies exhausted. History tells you exactly what comes next. Invaders arrive, they conquer, they replace the old order, and the civilization disappears into memory. This is how it has always worked. But China does something no one expects. It does not just resist invasion, it transforms it. Look north. For centuries, waves of steppe warriors press against the borders. Fast, disciplined, relentless. They do not share the same language, the same values, the same way of life. They are outsiders in every sense. When they finally break through, it should be over. And yet, something strange happens. The invaders do not erase China. They begin to change. At first, the difference is obvious. They rule as conquerors. They bring their own customs, their own power structures, their own identity. But ruling China is not the same as conquering it. The land is too vast, the population too large, the administrative system too complex. To govern it, they must adapt. They begin to use the Chinese language. They adopt the existing bureaucracy. They rely on scholars trained in Confucian principles. They take on the rituals, the symbols, the structure of legitimacy. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, they start to become part of the system they once conquered. This happens again and again. When the Mongols establish the Han Dynasty under Kublai Khan, they arrive as foreign rulers at the peak of military dominance. They control an empire that stretches across continents. No force seems capable of resisting them. And yet, even they cannot escape the gravitational pull of China. To maintain control, they adopt Chinese administrative practices. They rely on local officials. They position themselves within the existing framework of imperial rule. The conquerors begin to operate through the system they did not create. The same pattern repeats with the Manchus during the Qing Dynasty. They enter as outsiders, but they do not attempt to destroy the structure they find. They step into it. They preserve it. They rule through it. Now consider what this means. Most civilizations are destroyed when they are conquered because their identity is tied to their rulers. Remove the rulers, and the system collapses. But China has already separated those two things. The structure exists beyond the dynasty. The identity exists beyond the emperor. So when invaders arrive, they face a choice: destroy everything and attempt to rebuild from nothing, or use what already works. They choose the second option, and in doing so, they become part of the very system they intended to replace. This is not just survival, this is absorption. China does not need to win every war to endure. It does not need to keep every enemy out. It only needs to ensure that anyone who enters cannot remain unchanged. The empire acts like a force field, not by blocking what comes in, but by reshaping it. And this reveals something deeper, something more powerful than armies or walls. China's strength is not just in resisting collapse, it is in converting threats into continuity. But even this is not enough on its own, because for a system to endure across generations, across rulers, across invasions, it needs something more precise, something that can function even when leadership fails. It needs a mechanism, a structure that keeps the empire running, no matter who sits on the throne. The secret weapon, the system that outlived emperors. Empires do not usually collapse all at once. They decay from the inside. Corruption spreads quietly. Officials become loyal to themselves instead of the state. Decisions stop serving the people and start protecting power. By the time the ruler realizes what is happening, the system is already broken. This is where most empires fail. They depend too much on the quality of a single leader. A strong ruler can hold everything together. A weak one can bring everything down. China found a way to reduce that risk. It built something that did not depend entirely on the emperor. At the center of this transformation is a quiet but revolutionary idea. Governance should not belong only to those born into power. It should belong to those who understand how to preserve it. This is where the imperial examination system begins to take shape. Instead of relying only on noble families or military loyalty, the state starts selecting officials through rigorous testing. Not just simple tests, but years of preparation, deep study, and intellectual discipline. Candidates are evaluated on their knowledge of classical texts, their ability to reason, their understanding of moral and political order. This changes the nature of power. Now imagine the scale of it. Across the empire, young men dedicate their lives to mastering the principles of governance. They study not to conquer, but to serve. They compete not on the battlefield, but in examination halls. Success does not depend on lineage alone. It depends on merit, discipline, and knowledge. Over time, this creates an entire class of individuals whose identity is tied not to a dynasty, but to the system itself. These are the scholar officials. They become the backbone of the empire. When an emperor rises, they serve him. When an emperor falls, they remain. When a dynasty collapses, they do not disappear. They carry the knowledge, the procedures, the structure forward into whatever comes next. Think about the implications. Even if the top of the system breaks, the foundation stays intact. Taxes continue to be collected. Laws continue to be interpreted. Administration continues to function. The empire does not need to be rebuilt from nothing, because the people who know how it works are still there. This is the difference between a system that collapses and one that resets. Most empires lose their administrative memory when they fall. China preserves it, and this preservation creates continuity across centuries. A new ruler does not need to invent a new structure. He inherits one, a system already tested, already refined, already understood by those who operate it. His power is real, but it is also limited by the framework he steps into. This is the hidden balance. The emperor holds authority, but the system holds continuity. That balance prevents total collapse. It absorbs shocks. It stabilizes transitions. It ensures that even when leadership fails, the machinery of the state continues to operate. Now you can begin to see the pattern more clearly. China did not rely on a single solution. It layered its defenses. Ideas created unity. Absorption neutralized threats. And now structure ensures survival. But there is still one piece missing, because even with ideas, even with systems, collapse still happens. Rebellions still erupt. Dynasties still fall. Chaos still spreads. So the final question emerges. What if collapse itself is not the enemy? What if it is part of the design? Collapse as a reset button. Stand in the middle of a rebellion, not from a distance, but inside it. The air is thick with smoke. Villages are empty or burning. Armies that once marched under imperial banners now fight against them. The authority that held everything together is dissolving in real time. This is the moment every empire fears. The moment when control slips away and nothing seems capable of stopping the fall. In most of history, this is where the story ends. But in China, this is where the system reveals its most unsettling feature. Collapse is not an accident. It is not an exception. It is part of the cycle. When corruption grows unchecked, when officials exploit instead of serve, when the emperor becomes distant from the reality of his people, pressure begins to build. It does not explode immediately. It accumulates. Taxes rise. Trust erodes. Local tensions multiply. The system starts to drift away from its original purpose. And then, something breaks. Rebellions do not appear out of nowhere. They emerge as a response to imbalance. They spread because the population recognizes something has gone wrong. Not always consciously, not always organized, but collectively. The structure has lost its legitimacy. This is where the mandate of heaven returns, not as a theory, but as a force in motion. When suffering becomes visible, when disasters seem to confirm that the order of the world is failing, people begin to accept that the current dynasty no longer has the right to rule. Resistance grows. Leaders rise from unexpected places. Sometimes they are generals. Sometimes they are peasants. Sometimes they are figures no one would have noticed before the crisis. The old system fights back, but it is already weakened. It cannot fully contain what is happening, because the problem is no longer external. It is internal. And then comes the turning point. The dynasty falls. At this exact moment, most civilizations enter a period of irreversible decline. Their institutions collapse. Their identity fractures. Competing powers tear the remains apart. The memory of what once existed fades with each passing generation. China follows a different path. The fall of a dynasty does not erase the system. It clears it. Corrupt networks are broken. Ineffective leadership is removed. Power structures that no longer function are dismantled. What remains is the framework, the administrative knowledge, the cultural identity that survived every previous collapse. Out of that, something new begins to form. A new leader claims legitimacy. A new dynasty establishes control. But this is not a complete reinvention. It is a restoration with adjustments. The same principles return, refined by the failures that came before. This is the reset. Instead of allowing decay to destroy the entire structure, collapse acts as a release. It removes what cannot be fixed and makes space for renewal. It is violent. It is chaotic. But it is not meaningless. It serves a function. Think about the long-term effect of this process. Over centuries, each cycle eliminates weaknesses that were not addressed before. Each new dynasty inherits a system that has been tested by failure. Adaptation becomes embedded in the structure itself. This is why China does not simply survive collapse, it evolves through it. What appears to be destruction is also correction. What seems like the end is also a transition. The system does not resist change, it channels it. Now the pattern is complete. Power rises, it stabilizes, it declines, it collapses. And then from that collapse, it rises again. Not identical, but connected. Not untouched, but strengthened. And yet, there is still something deeper holding all of this together. Something that allows millions of people across vast distances and different eras to accept this cycle instead of resisting it. Because a system like this cannot survive on structure alone. It requires belief, the invisible force, belief, order, and identity. Strip away the armies, the emperors, the laws, and what remains. Something less visible but far more powerful. A shared understanding of how the world should be ordered. Without it, no system holds. With it, even collapse can be endured. In China, that invisible force was not imposed at the edges. It was cultivated at the center of everyday life. Imagine growing up in a world where hierarchy is not questioned, but understood, where the relationship between parent and child, elder and younger, ruler and subject, follows the same pattern. Respect flows upward. Responsibility flows downward. Each role carries duty, not just privilege. This is not enforced only by law. It is taught, repeated, reinforced in every interaction. The teachings associated with Confucius become more than philosophy. They become a framework for reality, a way to interpret behavior, to judge actions, to define what is right and what is disorder. Harmony is not an abstract ideal. It is a measurable condition of society. Now consider how this shapes an empire. When people believe that order is natural and necessary, they do not see the system as something external. They see themselves inside it. Their identity is connected to it. Serving the family, respecting authority, maintaining balance, these are not political acts. They are moral ones. This creates a deep form of stability. Even when a dynasty weakens, even when corruption spreads, the underlying belief does not disappear. People may reject a ruler, but they do not reject the idea of order itself. They do not abandon the structure. They wait for it to be restored. This is the critical difference. In many civilizations, when authority collapses, people turn away from the system entirely. Fragmentation begins. Competing identities replace a shared one. The structure dissolves because belief in it dissolves. In China, belief remains intact. The emperor is seen as the highest point in a larger moral order, not the creator of it. When he fails, it is not the system that is wrong. It is the individual who has lost alignment with that system. This allows people to separate the failure of leadership from the legitimacy of the structure. That separation is what preserves continuity. Think about how powerful that is. You can remove the ruler without destroying the idea of rule. You can replace the dynasty without erasing the identity of the civilization. The core remains untouched, and this belief is reinforced across generations. Education spreads it. Rituals embody it. Governance reflects it. It becomes self-sustaining. People internalize the expectations of order, and in doing so, they help maintain it, even in times of uncertainty. This is why the system does not collapse completely, even under extreme pressure, because it is not held together only by force or administration. It is held together by shared meaning. Now step back and compare this to other empires. What happens when belief disappears? What happens when people no longer see themselves as part of a unified structure? That is where the real difference becomes clear. And to understand it fully, you have to place China side by side with one of the greatest empires that ever existed, Rome. Why Rome died and China didn't. Place two empires side by side at their peak. On one side, Rome. On the other, China. Both vast, both powerful, both convinced at some point that their dominance was unshakable. Now watch what happens when pressure begins to build. Rome expands rapidly, stretching its borders across continents. Its strength comes from conquest, from the constant absorption of new territories, new wealth, new labor. Expansion is not just growth, it is survival. The system depends on it. China grows as well, but its foundation is different. Its strength is not tied to continuous expansion, but to continuity. Its identity is rooted in a shared structure, a cultural core that does not depend on how far its borders reach. At first, both systems appear equally stable. Then the cracks appear. In Rome, political instability increases. Power struggles intensify. Leadership becomes unpredictable. The empire splits into competing centers. Economic pressure rises. External threats grow stronger, and something deeper begins to happen. The sense of unity starts to fade. Identity fragments. People begin to see themselves less as part of a single empire and more as part of local regions, local interests, local survival. Loyalty shifts. The idea of Rome weakens from within, long before its final collapse. When the Western Roman Empire falls, it does not reset. It breaks apart. The administrative system disintegrates. The shared identity dissolves. The structure that once held everything together does not reassemble itself. What follows is not renewal, but fragmentation. New kingdoms emerge, each moving in its own direction, disconnected from the original core. Now look at China under similar pressure. Political instability appears. Dynasties weaken. Rebellions erupt. External forces invade. By every external measure, it should follow the same path as Rome. But it does not. The key difference is not in the events themselves. It is in how the system responds to them. In China, identity does not fragment in the same way. Even during division, even when multiple regimes exist at the same time, there remains a shared understanding of what China is. The language persists. The administrative logic persists. The cultural framework persists. People may serve different rulers, but they do not abandon the idea of the unified civilization. This creates a powerful effect. When collapse occurs, there is something to return to. A new dynasty does not need to invent a new identity. It reconnects to an existing one. It claims legitimacy by restoring what is already recognized. The past is not lost. It becomes a reference point for rebuilding. Rome does not have this advantage. Once its structure breaks, there is no single framework strong enough to pull everything back together. The pieces move independently. The system does not reset. It ends. China's system, by contrast, is designed for reassembly. It does not depend on uninterrupted stability. It depends on the ability to restore order after disruption. Its continuity is not linear. It is cyclical. This is why one empire disappears and the other returns. Not because one was stronger in battle, not because one avoided crisis, but because one built a system that could survive the loss of power while the other could not. And now, with everything laid out, one final question remains. If China could endure collapse, absorb invasion, preserve its structure, and maintain belief across centuries, What is the core principle that ties all of this together? What is the real reason it never truly died? The final reveal. The real secret. Now step back and look at everything you have seen. The rise of absolute power and its failure. The shift from force to ideas. The absorption of invaders. The creation of a system that outlives rulers. The cycles of collapse that do not destroy, but renew. The belief that holds everything together even when leadership fails. Individually, each of these explains part of the story. Together, they reveal something much deeper. China did not survive for 2,000 years because it was always strong. It survived because it was built to recover from weakness. This is the difference most people miss. Strength creates empires. Adaptation preserves them. From the beginning, China developed a structure that could absorb shock without breaking completely. When power became too concentrated, it fractured. When corruption spread, it triggered collapse. When external forces invaded, they were pulled into the system instead of replacing it. When rulers failed, the administrative and cultural framework remained. Nothing was allowed to remain static for too long. At first, this may seem like instability. But look closer. Each collapse removed what no longer worked. Each new dynasty rebuilt using what had proven effective. Over time, this created a system that was not fixed, but self-correcting. A civilization that did not depend on avoiding failure, but on learning from it. This is why the empire could disappear and return without losing its identity. The core was never tied to a single dynasty, a single leader, or a single moment in history. It existed at a deeper level, in its ideas, in its institutions, in the way people understood order, authority, and continuity. This is the real secret. China was never just an empire. It was a system designed to outlive its own collapses. Now think about the implications. Most civilizations fear collapse because it means the end. China integrated collapse into its structure. It transformed the greatest threat into a mechanism of survival. What destroys others becomes, in this case, a process of renewal. And this is why it could endure what others could not. Not because it avoided crisis, but because it expected it. Not because it resisted change, but because it adapted through it. Not because it was unbreakable, but because it knew how to break without disappearing. So when you ask how the Chinese Empire lasted for 2,000 years, the answer is not found in any single dynasty or ruler. It is found in the system that allowed it to fall, rebuild, and continue. A system that turned time itself into an ally.